Okay. Welcome everyone to Hivemind Technologies. I'm here with Izzy and Ignacio, and today we're going to discuss an article that they've written together, the overview of popular HTTP frameworks for Scala. So yeah, I'm Daniel, a Scala developer here at Hivemind Technologies, and with me is Izzy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Isaias or Easy, and I'm here since yeah 5 years now, and Scala developer, and also doing infrastructure as code, everything that's actually coming up, taking a look at, and trying to be as hopeful as possible.
Wonderful. And Ignacio?
Hello, I'm Ignacio, also developer for Hivemind for one year and a half, more or less. Also, I like different technologies, working in different languages.
Excellent. So yeah, thank you too for joining me. I've read your article. It's a really wonderful article. Thank you very much for writing it. And I have quite a bit of experience with HTTP frameworks, and in particular, the ones you looked at are the HTTP 4S, ZIO-http, Tapir or Tapir, and Caliban. I have experience with the first three and not Caliban's, and it was very enlightening reading your article. So it was very enjoyable. Could you just tell me what was the inspiration behind writing this article and your investigation into the frameworks, please?
Yes, the I have used some of these frameworks for commercial use, and I wanted to compare with the others available, for example, Tapir and ZIO-http. And yeah, that was the main inspiration. I just wanted to do a small example of with every one of them and try to compare the good things and the bad aspects of everyone.
And Izzy, yourself, you have much experience with HTTP frameworks for Scala.
Yes, of course. So ZIO-http seems to be the new kid on the block, and we have been recently used that as well. And I was interested in maybe how it does compare to the others. And so I was very happy to hear that Ignacio was comparing those. So kudos to him for writing that. And then as he was starting, then we threw in maybe to also take a look at Caliban in there, and then this very well-rounded article came out. And I think it's a very good starting point to make a decision on what to choose on your project.
Exactly. Yes, it's very informative, and each library has its own pros and cons, which we'll go at. So let's have a quick look at the article, shall we? So everyone, you can find the article on our website, hivemindtechnologies.com, under the blog section, overview of HTTP frameworks for Scala. So we'll just take a quick look here after your introduction. So we'll have a quick look at the comparisons of the four libraries. So yeah, ZIO-http obviously based on ZIO, and Caliban as well was based on ZIO, and I believe Tapir was as well. Well, Tapir has a ZIO flavor and a cat's effect flavor. Is that
Yes,
correct?
it has some different integrations that you can use.
Hmm. So I have used the cat's effect flavor of Tapir, and I'm not a big fan of cats, so I didn't have a great experience with it. But I really liked what it was attempting to do. So HTTP4S, as you say, is the general purpose one, is I think the oldest library perhaps as well, and
Yeah, I think it's the most stable, let's say, because
mm,
it has some years developing and improving the framework.
and yeah, stability can count for a lot, especially for large enterprise projects. So even though it may
Yeah.
be the oldest and not the fanciest, that stability could be what some people are looking for.
Mm.
Uh,
And I
is it?
think there are even more older
Yeah.
ones in
Mm,
the Akka space, or
of course.
um, and STTP maybe as well. Want to mention the Scala space.
Mm,
And but yeah,
yeah. So all of them, yeah, as with Scala in general, has excellent support for asynchronous programming. And community-wise, again, as you said, HTTP4S is quite old and well established, so it's a very good community. A lot of bug fixes, and probably most of your problems can be found on Stack Overflow or on the GitHub issues page, whereas the newer ones, ZIO is still growing very well, but there might still be some hiccups there that might catch you out. And then same for Tapir as well, I think. And learning curve. Well, Ignacio, yeah, I think let's discuss that first. I think that might be one of the most interesting topics, the learning curve for
Learning curve.
each of these libraries. Because which ones did you have experience with before writing the article?
Yeah, I had experience with HTTP4S in a commercial project. Also with Caliban. In the same project, we have different APIs, and for one you use Caliban, and the other one was HTTP4S. The learning curve of let's say I was starting with the Scala and was a lot at the same time.
Mm,
The the learning curve for, let's say, for Scala is first than the learning the frameworks. But I learned the frameworks at the same time of learning Scala, so it was very difficult at that time get the async effects APIs
mm,
compiling and working as expected. Um, Also, if I can mention that the other frameworks that I left out um, will be a second part of the article because I
mm.
left out, for example, Play that I use a lot, also AK and other ones.
That's exciting to see. Yeah, this is you have labeled this as part one, so looking forward to part two. And Izzy, what about yourself? Like, which of these libraries are you most experienced with, and do you have any opinions on the different learning curves for each library?
I think the most experience I have with HTTP4S, and I've been creating some middlewares in there
Mm,
and try to use some high-level routing in there and centralize many of the aspects. So there's plenty of tooling that helps you building those kind of things, which I really like how pluggable it is. It is also integrating very it does a snug fit with the Cats ecosystem. If you're into it, that's really cool. And the only thing, there's a very steep learning curve to get into all the different modules and functionality that the Cats ecosystem is providing. And in order to get something going, you already have to know a lot of things. And that's something that I would say is a bit of a bummer for, let's say, new starters.
mm,
And so that's why I'm very hyped of ZIO-http. They try to cut away a lot of these things, and I think it works quite well in that regards. So many of the abstractions that you would see coming up from the functional programming space, which I really like,
mm,
just have been packaged in a very different manner so that it's more approachable, at least from my own perspective, when also dealing with clients that need to be onboarded on their tech that we help them provide with them. So I think that's a very interesting point. On the other side, if you are looking for flexibility, I would say it might make sense to go the extra mile and take a look at the CATS ecosystem because it provides you so much pluggability and modularity that you can just develop it in any direction that you want and might think of. But maybe 80% of the time, you don't need that flexibility and you're just good to go with whatever the toolbox is providing you in the ZIO ecosystem.
mm.
And one also downside that I see on the Cats world there is sometimes the library versions just don't line up. So if you're going through, let's say, a long maintenance project, it can happen. Oh, half of the project is already working on the new version, and the other one is just not compatible yet, and you have to be either waiting for the other libraries to line up, or you can also invest and collaborate and help the process. But it's just things to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. When I was first introduced to cats, I found it to be an incredibly steep learning curve. But then with ZIO, on the other hand, it felt more like the learning curve, you were given a ladder for it. So it was a much more graceful ascent into the ZIO framework compared to cats and cats effect.
Another thing I would say is that these frameworks, once you know Scala and one effect system like CATS or ZIO, then it's they're simplified their interfaces a lot, so it's not so difficult to get going for the first time if you already know an effect system.
Yeah, so since you talked about HTTP4S, let's actually take a quick look at the code for that. So I actually think this is the smallest code snippet of all of them. So Izzy, what you were saying about it being quite concise and flexible. So you've gone here, your basic hello world kind of setup, and you've got here quite simply, there's the recognizable HTTP verb right there, get at the root of the that refers to the root of the URL of the website. Then the slash, which again recognizable in any URL, hello, and you get an okay hello world. So this arrow here denotes the response, and again a HTTP recognizable okay right there. And then you've got a second root here, again a get on the root, but now on books, and you're resolving it again with the inbuilt libraries okay and linking it to a function right there. And then quite simply adding together all of your roots with this nifty, fancy looking DSL plus operator, yeah. Greater than, equal than, lower than. It's a bit weird.
So,
there are different versions, aren't there? Different operators.
Yeah, they're different, I think. And also, as you can see, the definition of the routes are like minimal. The only maybe obscure or dark place that you cannot see everything is this off operator that passes the effect type, and you don't know what magic is being done inside there, but it is a clarifying the definition of the routes very much.
Yeah. And yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Izzy, if I remember my Scala literature, but this right here is a Scala partial method. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's used also in conjunction with the extractor. So the right thing, the left part of the arrow, and the right part of the case. So that get arrow and
Yeah.
slash books part. That's using extractors in Scala to give you the ability to match on certain parts and also to take it apart. So in this case, the extractor is not extracting anything, but if you would have, let's say, a URL parameter, then you could extract it that way as well. And that would then play a role in there. But as you see, or said already, it's quite concise, but it also hides a lot of things. So the magic is there, and we have implicits. For example, this thing produces an OK, and actually, the HTTP routes expects you to generate an IO. And so this is automatically doing some magic for you already. And if you don't know, you might trip up with this. So it's actually expecting everything to be asynchronous. So everything should be somehow wrapped in some form of IO. But this signature doesn't really tell you it right away. So it might be a surprise if you are integrating direct responses with responses from other APIs that produce asynchronous results. Then you may lead into yourself into issues trying to find out the right types, the expected types, and the conversions that happen on the go. So it's very concise for the simple thing, but it's also a lot of things doing in the background that you may not notice by just looking at it.
That is a very good point. And well, actually, the entire app's there. You've got a small chunk of code for your repository, but that's very basic. But yeah, you see the suggestion here on the actual run method. It is wrapped in an IO, although it is the run method. So, of course, it would be wrapped in an IO. But it's a very good point that your routes as well are, by definition, yeah, all asynchronous here, even though you're not actually doing asynchronous work. But by their wrapping them in this IO over here, they become asynchronous. And yeah, which
another thing worth mentioning there is that I try to use a simple case class or model class, for example, this case books, and try to use a library for converting to JSON and from JSON. So I return a list of books, and the framework should be take care of converting those books to JSON, for example.
Excellent. So yeah, these endpoints are all just returning JSON objects, and in this case, well, a JSON string and a JSON list, right?
Yeah,
So
using implicits and, for example, CRC or
mm,
the other one in ZIO JSON or
it's a very
different
good
libraries.
point, and often a point of difficulty for many people coming to Scala is the trouble of implicits.
Hmm.
They can be
Yeah.
quite hard to track, and sometimes by their very nature, they're acting implicitly, so you don't know which ones are acting. Thankfully, tools IDE such as IntelliJ does have a menu option which will show you all the implicits, and then perhaps that's falling down a well though, because or down a rabbit hole, because then you'll see just how many implicits are dancing around the place, and that can be quite scary for new people coming to Scala, I feel. And so,
Yeah, if you're not used to it, it can be very intimidating.
yeah, it takes a while to get a handle on it. I feel of apps. It took me about 6 months after I started Scala before I really started getting a handle on implicits, I think. Okay. Shall we move on to the ZIO-http library then? So, yeah,
Yes, sure.
I myself am big ZIO fan. Love it. I would do code every project in ZIO, even if it wasn't suitable. I don't care because I'm a big fan of it. And after experiencing it, and never want to go back to cats. And so yeah, I was very happy to see it included here because I've used ZIO HTTP many times before. Has it got a version one rollout yet? Because I don't think it has. I even used it before it was called ZIO HTTP and was just called ZHTTP, and that wasn't included in the. It was a community library at first, but has been rolled into the main ecosystem since then. So, Ignacio, you only started learning ZIO this year, I believe. So you've got the freshest opinion on this, I think.
Yeah, well, I started using ZIO in Hivemind. So, well, I started learning ZIO before, but the first commercial experience with ZIO was this year, yes, in March, I guess, on some projects. Um, yeah, I love the functionality of ZIO, the practicality, the practically oriented APIs that they have in comparison with cats.
Mm.
Um, Also, performance is a big topic in ZIO. I think they have much time and investment to optimize the runtime. So
That's a very good
that
point. You have written us an excellent article on Z layers before, which
yeah.
people can also find on our blog. So if anyone's a bit confused about Z layers in ZIO, please check out Ignacio's other article. And Izzy, what about yourself? What's your experience with ZIO and even ZIO HTTP so far?
Yeah. Now 6 months that I've touched it, but it was very good when I last touched it, and I'm also very pleased to touch it again whenever I can.
Mm.
I think it's a very useful addition to the ecosystem, and it completes the picture. And so, from my personal point of view, it's a very good take on it. And you mentioned performance, and I think that's also critical in some applications. The HTTP4S ecosystem, on the other hand, has a bit of an issue because it's always building on the CATS modular system. And so we have usually an application expecting things to go wrong. So there is a notion of things going wrong, like with an either.
Mm.
And in order to make that happen with asynchronous computation, you always have to wrap this, like you have an either and async, in fact, like I/O, always the two together. And when you do stack the two, how the HTTP routes in HTTP4S does it, you lose performance because you always are going through these two layers. Well, and in ZIO, you don't have that issue because they're just baked into one monad. Don't want to use that word too much, but so these concepts are just baked into one, and you don't have to always jump between the two layers that are built there. And if you put the other thing on top, like looking up things in the environment, there would be a reader in the CATS ecosystem, and then you have three of them. And so every computation is then going through these three layers. Well, on the other side, you just have one. And now maybe that's a bit confusing when I say layers. I don't mean the ZIO layers. I mean just the layers, how these different
Mhm.
components inside the um, HTTP framework are lined up to form this notion of um, potential errors,
Mm.
which is already baked into the ZIO type.
That's a very good point. Yes, the ZIO monad, or just the ZIO type as you were, has the error built into it. So let's actually take a look at your code here. So you've got your main application, and yeah, as you were saying, you've got your type here. You're using an RIO. I don't know if I can remember all the ZIO shorthands, but which one is the RIO? So you've got
RIO is just an IO that it cannot fail, and
cannot.
it has a context in there. There is the server and the book repository in this case.
Yep. The context, it's expecting these to be injected in later, and it's producing a nothing.
It's producing nothing because it's a loop and loop that never returns.
Yeah. So this is the top of your application. As you said,
Mhm.
you've named it My App Logic here. So you've quite simply, and again, I love that, yeah, ZIO, everything resolves to a for comprehension, which I think looks very nice. So you're starting your application, you're grabbing the ZIO service, the book repository. So I guess that would be the same as the one we saw before. But here you're declaring that it's required, and this server one as well is implicitly uh, doing the same thing here,
Mhm.
throwing in your roots into the server with and just placing in with standard object-oriented programming here, inserting your book repository there as well, and then you're running your thing. And then, of course, at the top of every ZIO application will be your provide function here, and you're providing them in here.
The
Which,
dependencies, yeah.
so yeah, your live book repository and your default server application. I think that. So yeah, your book repository is over here. It's slightly more complex now. You're using, well, these are the roots. Sorry, largely quite similar to HTTP4S. You're providing,
Mhm.
you're saying get right
The
here,
method, yeah.
and at the root, well, that's just a slash, but starting from the root implicitly anyway. And then your
Mhm.
hello, and you're handling it, and same again. So, uh, you have any thoughts on this, Ignacio? Izzy?
Yeah, in this case, the handler function does the conversion, I guess. For example, for a response that is of type text, or maybe in the other case that is a collection of books, you run an effect. For example, this. Let me see. Um, well, there is a method getBooks, yeah,
Yes.
the repo getBooks, and then you map it to code the each books in a JSON string,
Hmm.
and you return a JSON response there.
Yeah.
So the
And
handler does the conversion for returning the correct response type.
and then your book repository implementation was over here, largely similar. Actually, you've added more books, so excellent.
In this case, you can see the operation getBooks
Hmm.
returns an O
A
uh,
UIO. Oh,
UIO, sorry, that is in this case never fails and it doesn't have a context. In a real application, you will have a
hmm.
zero full type, but for the example,
Yep.
it's enough to return a zero succeed in this case.
Yeah. Just for a test, we're testing the frameworks. The HTTP framework's not a database
Mm.
right now, and yeah, you're using the shorthand ZIO succeed here just to
To
make
return
sure
a list
that we get
of
something,
vector.
an effect that always succeeds. Izzy, as well, what are your thoughts on this setup? I'm also thinking about readability. Like, do you have any thoughts about readability between this and HTTP4S? It's been largely quite similar, besides the extra complications of the ZIO monad.
Yeah, I think one addition on the notation thingy. So it makes things readable in terms of using those shorthands, but yeah, you always have to keep in mind what they actually mean. So we
Yeah.
had some discussions in the team whether to use always the full thing or maybe use the shortest possible.
Mm,
And what I like to keep in mind is U and the prefix to be unfailing or
mm,
and the R as runtime, so or requirement.
mm.
And so that helps a bit to guide through the naming of these different shorthands. Um, Besides that, I think it's a bit more concise in one direction because you don't have the partial methods, partial functions. which can be a bit of a pain point in Scala sometimes, especially because the notation changes. You need to introduce the case keyword, and so it's a bit cumbersome to work with them. But besides that, I think there's not big difference on the syntax. It's not that you have to write more code or that you have to decipher more code, which is, I think, the more important thing. Writing is easy, reading is hard.
Mm.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly what you say. The writing is easy, reading's hard, which is why I always emphasize readability when I'm ever writing code. I'm not writing this code for me. I'm writing this for the developer 4 years from now who's going to have to bug fix it, who maybe hasn't even graduated university yet. So, yeah. Let's move on to the next framework, Tapir or Tapir, however you pronounce it. I said I used this at previous company, the Cats version, and I really liked what it was going for, that it can generate you the open API documentation for your API and provide a client as well, a web client for that. So I absolutely love that section. But I had difficulty, one, wrangling cats, and then two, understanding the kind of the declaration of the endpoints I found a little bit difficult. Just trying to get it to express exactly what I wanted took me some more time than I would have liked. Did you guys have you guys had the same experience with
Yeah,
Tapir?
for me, writing this article, I never used Tapir before. I have the same experience. It gave me some time to get the endpoints, the examples, the responses, the response types, and there's a very big emphasis on declarative and of the endpoints, and then the implementation of the resolvers, let's say, of the endpoints. Yeah, it took me some time to get the types right and understand what are all those type parameters. But well, once you get it right, the benefits is the getting the documentation for free.
Exactly, yeah, for free. So, and it's always up to date. You don't have to go update this manually, which every developer is guilty of forgetting to update documentation. But since it's all pretty much almost documentation as code, or as close to as possible. Izzy, yourself, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm very deep into model-driven approaches, and this is just no different. And I like the fact that you can use code first, and the other one would be having documentation first, or API specification first. And yeah, the issue that can come up with this approach is that if you have a polyglot environment that requires multiple language to talk to each other, then this might not be the right thing to use. If that's not the case, and most of the times the tech stack can be quite homogeneous, then this is a very good choice. So you have one single point of truth, and everything's going to be derived from there, and you have no big discrepancies between documentation and code. And one other way to play this could be to use OpenAPI spec and generate code from there. But since OpenAPI spec is open, it will not be 100% suited for, let's say, your Scala project. So there's always going to be discrepancies in how to translate from one or the other. Well, in this case, it's a bit different since you're starting from a very rich type system, and you have to map this into the in the let's say Open API spec in the end. I think you have a less bigger problem to solve there. It's convoluted, it's boilerplatey, but you
Mm.
get all these niceties for free, and I think that's considering all the let's say issues around it, a very well-rounded take on it to get it going.
Yeah. So yeah, you've both raised that same point. It can be difficult, but if you get through the difficulties, I find generally it's never incredibly complicated. It was never too hard. It just took time to work it out. And so the documentation was pretty good, and the community was very helpful as well. And yeah, the benefits are greatly rewarding once you get through it. So let's take a quick look at the code. And you do mention here as well, actually, it is a bit more boilerplate code, which quite fitting, seeing as you've labeled it Java here, because there isn't a Scala label. So Java, big fans of boilerplate. So
Yeah,
you,
maybe the only thing that is different here from the rest is that I had to create this options object this option parameter that is handy for configuring, for example, exception handler or course interceptor if you want to avoid course or things like that. But if you get these options object minimal, then it's very similar to CATS or ZIO.
And actually, I notice here, did you write this example in Scala 3? Because we've got a given right here.
Yeah, I try to use the latest version of
Mm.
Scala and also all these frameworks. At that time, it was in November 2024, I guess. So to try to compare the latest versions.
Excellent. So yeah, it's ZIO again. So although there's a lot more going on here, there's a lot of similarities as well. You're invoking ZIO service here. You're actually declaring the HTTP server options as opposed to using the default ones before.
Yeah.
And then setting up a server. So fairly similar there. So if we actually look at the endpoints, perhaps, will be where the
Here one thing to
derivatives are.
mention, I wanted to mention is the endpoints, the book endpoint and the books endpoints. In this case, I made two with books. You can see the type. It has like 5 type parameters, and until you discover what is each one of them takes some time. The conversion to JSON is almost transparent, and one thing that I is similar to, for example, HTTP4S, is that there's a plus combinator or operator that you can combine this endpoints type with the implementation of the same, but there is the server endpoint, I guess, I think is the type. So you combine these two, and the implementation goes for each, is like linked for each endpoint, implementation of the server part.
Yeah. And yeah, what I do like with Tapir is I guess this is a domain specific language of sorts where you're quite clearly saying, okay, a get endpoint going in, error out, and coming out as well. So going in would be this is just the URL again, so this would be /book. You're defining if there's an error, what will come out of it. I like the word out, it's quite evocative. And then what typically would come out, and you've got your JSON body there. So as a programmer coming at this, it's quite, despite this quite bulky type over here, it's quite intuitive reading the code here, what this endpoint is doing.
And these two examples that are in the out field, let's say, are the documentation for the Swagger or the Open API.
Exactly, yeah. And even you provide an example which will get displayed in the Swagger. We'll actually go have a quick look at it now. So here we are, your books endpoint. So yeah, if you start up the application and go to the docs
Yes.
page in it, which gets created automatically for you, you get an Open API page right here, and even got your example over here. And great thing with Swagger as well is that you can run it. You can use it to live test your service. So manually test being built in. And yeah, the service as well. So you again more ZIO code, quite fairly similar before, but you're doing a lot more. And Izzy, what about you? Have you gotten to use Tapir at other in any projects? Did you mention before?
Not in projects. I've been using it to nurture my let's say interest in model-driven approaches. So I have been trying a few things, and we have done some spikes also at Hivemind. That was also part of it. And what I really like about Tapir is that you get, let's say, the documentation out of it. And it's also a very interesting gateway to combine all these different technologies and their strengths. So as we see, we're using ZIO in this space, although the library is mainly built on the, as far as I recall, on the CATS IO type, and it just provides plugin libraries to have them be integrated into, let's say, also the ZIO ecosystem. So once you've done that integration bit, you most likely don't see CATS anymore, although it's working under the hood. So you have to just provide some imports and make that work. And then once that's done, you can have both working seamlessly together. So that's an interesting take to maybe unite the two words again. So if there is an issue, maybe having to decide whether one or the other. So you can also mix them. That's not an issue. This is a perfect example how this can be done,
Mm.
and bring the two words together if necessary. And in this case, we're just picking the best of both. Like Tapir is providing this new or different approach to model-driven documentation and code, and we're just combining it with the niceties from the ZIO
Mm.
world, although it's built on cats. So it's just a very interesting take on this.
Yeah.
Um,
Excellent. And let's move on to the final library you've tested in this article, Caliban. So this is a GraphQL library, which I have not had the opportunity to use GraphQL yet. Have either of you?
Yeah, maybe it's not so fair to compare it with the other three because it's really different. It's in the bottom is an HTTP protocol running out there, but it's something more on top of the HTTP protocol.
Mm.
So I use it in one project. Um, the comparing with the other two or the other three, you get the documentation for free also because
Mm.
you define all the types. But the main thing is in Caliban is that you define your types, your query types and your mutation types in the GraphQL schema using case classes. So if you know Scala, everybody knows case classes, and you can define the types for the operations and for the types of
Mm.
the query, the GraphQL data types using case classes. So this is the big take. The Caliban framework makes all the heavy lifting to generate the code for the client, for the
Mm.
documentation, and so on.
Yeah, that is a great point. Using the tools already inbuilt into Scala to help elevate your code like that, as opposed to having to learn new things. Izzy, any thoughts as well?
Yeah, same again here on the model-driven
Mm.
approach. So this is from the classification standpoint of view, similar to Tapir. You start with the code and you get the documentation out of it. And so code first approach. Um, and again, similar downsides to
Mm.
what Tapir has. If you start with the code, then you're stuck with the code. If you need a more open way to express it in a polyglot environment, then you may want to start with the schema. And I don't know if there is something to do it the other way around, though, derive the code from the schema. But in this case, we have it the other way. So you define the code and you get the schema because you define the schema using case classes. And then everything is oopsie daisy. So yeah.
Yeah. So let's take a look at your example in Caliban as well. So yeah, using ZIO here, so a lot of similarities again, running service. I think if we go down, we can see, yeah, the actual GraphQL API right here. So I think you'll have to talk me through this, Ignacio.
Mhm.
Do you want to
Yeah.
explain? Well, you got a special operator here as well, the two at symbols, which is quite funky in my opinion.
Yeah, the main thing here to define the GraphQL type, let's say this API
Mm.
variable, you define the case class queries with all the operations, for example, get books or
Mm.
get whatever. And then the mutations, they're the operations that mutate some data on the database, for example. And you define it as functions, as a Scala function. So in this case, add book takes a book and returns an effect of book
Mm.
in ZIO data type. UIO.
Yeah.
So and then you define the special values, the queries and mutations values that are specific to this implementation, and you pass these two values, queries and mutations, into the GraphQL data types. This in this case the GraphQL function, and then you can specify different parameters for like the options
Mm.
of the API, max number of fields or printing errors in a string in the console and so on.
That's very interesting. So you define your queries. So you've got your read-only operations here, queries, I assume, and your
So
mutations are your writing operations. So
exactly.
adding to the
Yeah,
book.
GraphQL forces you to do that. It's
Mm.
like the part of the framework of GraphQL.
I wonder if there's some optimizations under the hood there. And this kind of more interface and implementation separation here would be very beneficial for testing, I imagine, because you can inject
Mhm.
different versions of the book repository there during like unit testing, for example. So very useful. Um, so we see your repositories again, quite similar to before. It's pretty standard Scala code.
Mhm.
And then what, yeah, I love as well, documentation for free. So you go
Yeah,
to,
and also you get this GraphQL
mm,
interface that is known in GraphQL libraries that you can test your endpoints and your queries and mutations, and also you get all the documentation in the docs panel. You
mm,
can browse the different types and different operations. And yeah, you can test and have a history of commands, and you can see all the results in the JSON format or a GraphQL output in the
mm.
right.
That's really awesome. I really love this stuff. Izzy, any thoughts as well? I would say this is slightly, I don't know. You have to understand GraphQL. As said, you said Ignacio, it's comparing apples with oranges because now this is a GraphQL library, but GraphQL has its own place in many organizations. And Izzy, do you think that decision between whether to use just a standard a standard maybe SQL libraries or NoSQL databases backend or GraphQL backend, uh, quite a difficult business decision to make. Do you have any opinions on that? Any thoughts or experience as well?
So if you take a look at big companies like, let's say, GitHub, they usually offer both, and they
Mm,
give you the ability in with the GraphQL space to just use what you really need from the API. While on the other side, in HTTP land, you usually have to provide everything that everyone might need, and then you have bigger payloads and all the problems with them, and different devices will request different data depending
mm,
on the screen size. You may not can even show everything that the API endpoints provide you. So it doesn't really make sense for mobile to have this big JSON output.
mm,
And so the mobile devices also run on a different connection. So you might want to cut down on the payload sizes. And then if you are in that space and you have many different devices with different requirements, then it's probably likely that you want to go the route using GraphQL. And sometimes you also can provide both. Um, so if you are into streaming or other situation where you need to provide data on a different format, then you might go with HTTP and use the more standard approaches there. But yeah, there's a lot of things going on. I'm not 100% sure whether you can do streaming with GraphQL APIs.
mm,
But at the moment, it looks a bit more like, okay, send and response patterns, and you have the total freedom to choose what you want from the available things
mm,
and combine them. So you get also a bit of optimization. You can provide a query that's a bit more complex,
mm,
combining
Mhm.
queries that are going to be pre-calculated on the server, and you get just a result delivered. That's also quite cool in that space. Um,
And also there is a very big difference. They cache some responses. Also, you have different error handling because the GraphQL HTTP interfaces always return at 200. So if you wanna show the errors
mm,
or you have to handle differently and put the errors in the response itself. Um, Also, there are other differences with the frameworks, HTTP frameworks. But this is particular to GraphQL, not only not just for Caliban.
mm. Great point. So, any thoughts before I want to do a small exercise with you before we finish? But any final thoughts? What did you learn through this investigation? Any surprises or anything like that? Any opinions you might have? Ignacio, do you want to go first? Or?
Yeah, no, just what we mentioned is like all of these four options are very mature. They have a big community. You have examples in the websites of the companies. Also, there are more and more implementations you can use as a reference. So I think there is no clear winner. So you for each case it's better to choose one or the other. I think I commented some of these options in the article. For example, if all your stack is done in ZIO, maybe ZIO-http is the best option. Also the same for CATS and HTTP4S. For Tapir and Caliban, they can be compared about the documentation that you get for free. And Caliban is very different in the sense that it's a GraphQL API. So
excellent points. And Izzy, yourself?
I think you wrapped it up very good, Ignacio. The only thing that may come to mind after talking about it right now is maybe we could refine it a bit with specific questions to ask in order to guide people a bit more on the course of selecting things. Like there may be 3, 4 main questions to ask, given the current set of tools, or not tools, but the classification, and to guide, okay, maybe this direction, that direction. Like, do you have you already say that, like, if your project is mainly using CATS or ZIO, that's probably one main indicator. And then the other direction, do you need, usually you need documentation and have the documentation up to date as well. And depending on how often the requirements change, you may want to have an automated approach or not. And if it is very flexible in that regards, then maybe you have to combine a few of those or just stick with one.
Yeah, that is actually the final thing I wanted to ask you. Trying to think of just focusing on the first 3 libraries, so HTTP4S, ZIO-http, and Tapir. Which scenarios would each of these libraries lend themselves best to? So I'm trying to think of different business scenarios here, such as if tomorrow, Izzy, you were told to make an API for a certain backend, and that API was only going to be used internally, though, by other teams. I would think at that point, maybe forgetting whatever the code base is, if it's ZIO or CATS, Tapir might be the best option because it provides a very good documentation inbuilt into the library with it. So it'd be very easy to use by perhaps multiple other teams. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a very good starting point. I mean, everyone, most of the industry knows REST APIs quite well. So taking that choice might be a very good one. If you need more flexibility, though, the other one is also very, very well suited too. So the Caliban approach would then be for let's say you have different endpoints to provide to many different devices, then the other one is good.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, Ignacio, say tomorrow you're working at a very large client, a very large company, very important turnover, very important that the bottom line, and you are asked to create an API and it has to work and it has to grow for many years in the future. I would perhaps lean closer towards HTTP4S for that library because of its longer history. It's more established,
stable.
More stable, exactly. So that in this scenario, would you agree? Would more recommend HTTP4S in this case?
Yeah, I think we cannot forget if all the code base is done in some particular defect type. Because if you want to implement HTTP4S on top of ZIO, I don't know how it will integrate. And also there is if you compare Tapir and GraphQL and Caliban, they are very different in their sense. So you cannot you cannot tell if one is better than the other. Maybe for one case you need a GraphQL, and for one case you need a REST API. So
exactly, yes. I'm trying to think though for specific scenarios if we can think of where each of these libraries would perform best. And then, personally, if I had free choice, I, of course, would probably just go ZIO-http and write everything in ZIO. Well, I don't know what the best scenario would be.
And also the performance, I guess, I'm not sure, but I guess ZIO is better than HTTP4S. So that could be also a big
Yeah,
point
perhaps
if you have to choose.
a perhaps an internal microservice that you know is going to get hit a lot, perhaps by other services like in data crunching or something like that, or streaming.
Mm.
Izzy, you mentioned streaming actually. ZIO-http might be the best in that case for data streaming projects. Do you agree?
Yeah, especially when you have short turnaround times, like every
Mm,
request coming in is very quickly being responded to, then you can get up to very high throughputs if you want to.
But
That's definitely a possibility there. Not saying that the others can't compete or match with it. It's
mm,
always it's always tug of war depending on what the requirements are and how the underlying infrastructure is being built around it. And I usually also think that parts of the application frameworks and stack around it is also part of the infrastructure, like the monad stacking.
mm.
Sometimes it might make sense to not use a monad because of performance. So
Yep.
you can go that route if you can. If you can, it might make sense to not work with a monad, and then you're pretty much screwed when you go the route with ZIO because you don't have that much things to choose from because everything is a ZIO and everything is a monad.
Mm.
Um, if that's something that you need, you can tweak performance even more, but that's also very rare. So
Mm.
I don't know. For example, if Kio has some library for defining a REST API, for example, Kio is an FX system that doesn't use Monad, as
Mm.
far as I understand. So maybe that will be worth investigating in the next article.
That would be an interesting article as well, testing the different effects libraries of Scala. That would definitely
Mhm.
be very interesting. And okay, so I think we can wrap it up there. So thank you very much, Ignacio and Izzy. And yeah, I'd like to finish by stating you both stated quite clearly there. It's very important to discuss with the client what the requirements are and the business domain when selecting your libraries. And this is something that Hivemind Technologies specializes in. We don't just create solutions and dump them on the client. We work directly with clients and embed into their development teams to create ideal solutions using our extreme programming and fast delivery methodologies, which encourage fast iterations, regular customer feedback, and very fast development cycles. So yes, that's the strength of Hivemind Technologies. And if you're interested in learning more, please check out our website at hivemindtechnologies.com and our LinkedIn page. And please check out the rest of our articles. And from myself, Izzy and Ignacio, and everyone else here at Hivemind Technologies, thank you very much for your time. And we hoped this was very interesting for you.
Thank you very much.
yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Bye bye.